Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite sales podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and welcome back. We have a special guest for you today. We have Jon Feldman, VP of Sales at anecdotes.ai, a very exciting new startup that just raised $25 million, I believe. Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ross. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, from going through some of the prep work that we went through, some of the topics we're going to dive into around execution excellence, it's like you read my mind the last year, the importance of everything from positioning, strategy over tactics, and the manager mentality. But before we get into those, we'd love to get to know you a little bit and your journey to sales leadership in the last 20 plus years. So, how did you find your way into sales and sales leadership, Jon?
Yeah, I'm probably like a lot of other people who stumbled their way into technology sales. So I was working at a local Vancouver value-added reseller, and I was working with one of the vendor reps who was a wonderful woman. And she said, you'd probably be really good at this company where I work for. Would you be interested in interviewing there? And the company was called Seagate Software back in this is the late 90s, so about 1999 when I started interviewing there. Long story short, I accepted a role there. Seagate Software turned into Crystal Decisions, which then turned into Business Objects, which then turned into SAP. And it was an absolutely fantastic run. I made such fantastic relationships and friends that I keep. This is now 24 years later. So that's what really threw me into the tech industry. And I went from an individual contributor in Vancouver to leading the mid-market sales team in Sydney, Australia with that company. So,
Wow.
yeah, nothing but fantastic memories and pure gratefulness for those who took a chance on me.
Totally. Well, it sounds very familiar to a lot of amazing VPs of sales and CROs that we have on here, which is a lot of people didn't grow up as a 5-year-old boy and think, I want to grow up and I want to become a VP of sales, but it's an amazing career to stumble upon, especially if you are a lifelong learner, love to lead, and interested in kind of new things happening in the world. But, you mentioned meeting great people along the way and mentors. Who are some of the people that kind of stand out and, you know, big moments that were inflection points or key milestones for you?
Well, that's funny you should say that. I call him the godfather of Vancouver tech, but his name is Randall Isaac. He had a massive impact on me as both an IC and as a leader. And then I was lucky enough to work with a fantastic leader in Australia named Brenton Smith. He was he was so gifted at building a team culture and at building an organization where you wanted to work at. And then probably most recently in my career would be a person by the name of Sean Zuberbeer, who was the CRO at Galvanize. And then very recently, an absolute gem of a human being who I learned a lot from. And he was the SVP of sales at Absolute Software. And his name is Alan Sanderson. So these are the people that I hold pretty close and have fantastic memories with, and still have a relationship with today.
Awesome. Well, that's part of the fun of being in on a high stakes competitive team, right? When you win together and you work with these people in the trenches and get it done every week and every day and every quarter, you build those great close relationships, right?
100%. It's funny that you say that. There was a LinkedIn story. I don't know how many years ago it was, and it was basically a poll of ICs, and it was asking like, what do you value most in your sales leader, in your manager? And one of them was they're willing to jump in the foxhole anytime rather than be the person who manages from the ivory tower. And I like, look, you can't take me away from the customer or the meeting or the travel. I love to do it, but just as a leader, you do it in a different way. You don't steal the spotlight. That's for your salesperson to be executing upon. You're there for moral support and maybe for some like rank selling if there's somebody more senior in. But your job is to support, mentor, and coach that person who's going to execute on which hopefully is a fantastic meeting.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good lean into what we're going to be talking about today. around your kind of three key topics around driving execution excellence is what we obsess over here at 10 out of 10 GTM. And I love the first one. It's a good one to set up the rest, positioning. And I think sometimes people think about positioning in the world of marketing. I think as I've learned about, building a core in a new category and market in the last 4 years, everything in go to market starts with positioning. Would love to hear this from your perspective. I think we have two topics: setting yourself apart from the competitor. How do you differentiate? And how do you do it and how do you do it better? So curious to get your take on why, as a sales leader, positioning is number one, and what aspects of those would you focus on as a leader?
Well, I've taken Sandler sales. I can't tell you how many times I've taken that course. I've taken Command of the Message. I've taken Miller Hyman. I've read the Challenger book. Like you name it, I've probably studied it. But where positioning comes in is it was a line in Sandler actually, and it says, or it goes like this: it says, "You'll never be perceived as being better until you're perceived as being different." So if you
Mm,
think about that for a second, and this is interesting, is because most buyers perceive the solutions to be the same. So if that's true, if most buyers perceive the solutions as being the same, then what's the difference? Is it the person that they like the most? Is it favorable terms? I don't know. But I part of the strategy has always been is to set yourself apart from the other solutions and highlighting how you are different and therefore how you are better because you are different. So I've always sort of had a foot in that camp, and all of the sales strategies that I've put together are all based on some sort of differentiation. And
yeah.
then I was on a road trip to the Oregon coast, and I was got on my soapbox as I like to do, and we're having a long chat about this with another good friend of mine who's been in tech for ages. And he says, "You've got to start to listen to April Dunford and read her book and try to understand what
Yeah.
she's saying." And I'm
I
like,
was about to say yes. I was about to bring her up because she's
"Yeah,
excellent at this.
genius. It's like genius." And so what she's put together is very simple for people to understand, right? Anyway, long story short, big part of our sales cycle is always framing how we do it and how we
Yeah.
do it better. And then, to quote Command of the Message, then the proof points of people who've done this and the results that they've had. And I find when you take a position and I'm going to steal April's thunder, people don't buy products, people buy approaches. If you buy into that, you know,
Hmm.
at the end of the call with the prospect, right? You want them to think, you know, I've seen a few of these products, but I really like the way that they've positioned theirs, and I really like the way that their approaches to solving the problem. I want to
Yeah.
learn more. So that's our strategy. That is essentially so two questions that you have to ask, right, before you start your meeting. How do you want the prospect to feel at the end of the meeting, and how do you want them to think at the end of the meeting? You answer those questions, and then you perform your discovery or you do your sales cycle with those things in the back of your mind. And I think you'll have a little bit more success than you are now.
I love it. And I think one of the challenges that I felt personally selling new technology and innovative technology is you get so excited about the features, the functionality, the thing that you're doing differently. It's not about the way that they're solving the problem. You're not tying it to what they're doing today. You want to seem so shiny and new and not necessarily ground yourself in their reality and how you're different. It almost feels like you're selling yourself short a bit to be like, this is what you do. This is kind of like this thing, but you need to be grounded in that to be different, right? How do you think about, what I'm saying? Like April always talks about, not to get too into her stuff, but you need to compare yourself to something to
Yeah, you do.
differentiate,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
simplify, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting on that. It's like there's two camps. If you compare yourself to something, the downside is that you will be bucketed in and compared to that something, right?
Yep.
But there has to be a pivot in that conversation, and the pivot is like, look, we see the market, we've explained where it's going, I've explained how others do it, but this is why we built it this way. We built it this way because we believe that it's going here. So the prospect is going to make this leap, and it's going to be, I believe what that person just said. I like that approach. I'm gonna base my decision on that camp. That's what you want them to do. I mean, many of the technology companies that we know, or people that we know who work in these organizations, they're in red ocean markets, right? They have 3, 4, 5 different competitors. So this isn't about educating somebody on a market. They know what you do,
No, it's
what
making a
they want
decision
to.
based on features, yes, and
Yeah,
price.
exactly. They're going to make their decision. You're going to want them to make their decision because they like the way that you do it and they subscribe to that. And that's sort of what our big strategy is at Anecdotes.
I love it. Why do you think it's so hard to get sellers to sell in that way? I think the best sellers innately do this. I think the best sellers innately deeply understand the market, help educate customers, put themselves in their shoes, and are able to say, "Hey, I know how you do your day to day. I know how you use this type of, you know, handle this type of problem. This is how we do it differently."
Mm.
What do you think that leap is? That's that differentiator between those top sellers and the rest of the team who still struggles to have those types of conversations.
Well, because you can break them up into two types of conversations, or actually, if you take a step back, you can break them up into two types of plans. One is tactical and one is strategic. So tactical would be, I'm going to do general basic level discovery. I am then going to do a demo that doesn't really speak to anything other than I want to show you the product. And then you're probably going to ask me for a quote for the product. And what I will probably do is be worried about price. Now that is how people learn, in my opinion, when they first get into tech sales. What did one of my mentors call it? It was like you know, a meet demo quote chase, something like that, which was the strategy. But the good ones think strategically. They think, I'm going to enter a meeting. I want to make the meeting about them, and I want to understand and I leave them with some thoughts. And I said it before. What do I want them to think at the end of the meeting, and what do I want them to feel? And I'm going to write that down. And then I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
strategically weave in questions and experience that aim strictly to that. Then what good sellers do, or what strategic sellers do, is that they're able, and we just talked about this, is they're able to position their product in a much different light than their competitors so that they stand out, so that they're perceived as different, and so that they're perceived as better. And the third thing that they do, and this is magical, is, in my opinion, the best sellers are prescriptive sellers. They pull prospects through the sales cycle. They don't ask questions like, so what do you think the next step is? They say things like, hey, typically the next step is this. So it's a combination of those things, but I've had the pleasure of working with probably the most prescriptive seller that I've ever seen. And to watch them like perform the way they do, it's a completely different act than it is a I guess a an above or an average seller.
Totally. And the word that comes to mind when I think about those top sellers that we've all seen is the conviction they have, and they're able to communicate to the customer around this is the best way to do the thing you're doing, and the trust that you build when you come with that level of conviction, right? And it always reminds me of, for people that aren't in the sales world, and I try to compare it, is that amazing waiter or waitress that you get at that five-star restaurant. And
Oh,
they tell you the experience you're going to have, and it makes the food taste better, makes the wine taste better. And that's what it reminds me of when you see that amazing prescriptive, high conviction seller, right?
I love that you just said that. So I every time I meet my new SDR team, I tell them a story. And so I started off and I say, so what do you think your role is? And this is where we just talked about tactics and strategy, right? So they're usually young and they're usually in their first or second job, and they'll say, well, My role is to qualify the opportunity to pass it off. Or my role is to
Yeah.
first meet them and book the meeting for the AE. Or, I'm supposed to follow up on leads diligently and do a good job and pass them off. And I said, okay, so those are all the things that are in your job description. But then I tell them a story. I say, have you ever been to a five-star hotel? And then one will, raise their hand. Oh, it was amazing. Tell me about it. Well, I got out of the car, or my boyfriend or my husband got out of the car, and I was given flowers around my neck, and my husband was given the beads. I was taken to the pool area with the kids. My husband was sent to check in, and then we all met at the room, and there were yogurt flavored drinks. The bags were all basically on the beds. And then we were taken for a 15-minute tour of this wonderful resort. We came back and the bed sheets were pulled down and there's candy on the pillows. And I said, "Oh, how'd you make that? How'd that make you feel?" "Oh, it made us feel fantastic. It was amazing." I said, "Well, have you ever been to a zero-star motel?" And they're like, "Yeah." It's like, "What was that like?" "Well, I got there. I was scared, right? Yeah, nobody was there. I had to ring the bell 10 times, and then someone comes out from like what appears to be a bedroom right behind the check-in thing, right? We were given our key, told where to go, got in the room, locked it 10 times because there's a series of locks, and went to bed and couldn't leave fast enough and never told anybody I stayed there. I said, okay, so based on that, what do you think your job is? And then one person will inevitably get it. It's like, our job is to provide the five-star experience to the prospects. I said, that is your job. That is your job. So write down what you think a five-star experience would be from an SDR and aim for that, because you can beat your competition on customer experience alone. You're the first touch. And then I look like I'm, the second coming of Einstein, but really it's just, very easy stuff.
Totally. And that reminds me of, I think, some of the great things that you can do. And I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this, like helping fill a role, helping with other problems that they're not working with you as an AE or as a sales leader. There's so many things that you can help customers with that are beyond just the product. And those are like the things that you're saying will help you get deals done, regardless of the product. Obviously, you can stand behind that, but there's so many ways you can win a deal that's kind of beyond the tactics and more about the way of thinking about sales, right?
You know which one comes to mind? Is there's a big assumption that your buyer knows how to get things done in their organization. And a lot of times they don't. So I've seen really prescriptive sellers, especially when they're selling to somebody who doesn't buy a lot of technologies,
Mm.
is to have the meeting go, "Hey, look, you know what? I've been selling into XYZ department for 10 years, right? Have you bought a lot of software? No. Let me tell you how it happens, right?" And like I've seen people take notes and like they position themselves as the person who could help them get it done within their own organization and therefore elevate themselves in the sales cycle. So that absolutely exists. But once again, Ross, that's a strategy, not a tactic, right?
Totally, totally. Well, that's we're already into the second topic after positioning. We already dove right in. Um, Curious to hear what you mean by you wrote this down. Sales is like chess.
Sales is like chess in that before you make any move, you have to think about it. So when I first learned to play chess, it was like, okay, I understand how the pawn moves and all of the other pieces move. I'm just going to go, right? I'm just going to move pieces and whatever happens, happens. And then you get good and you're like, you know what? I'm going to move that pawn too, so I can take out the bishop. And then that frees up the horse and I'm going to attack on the right hand side, and I'll leave the left hand side untouched in case I have to protect the queen. Nobody thinks like that when they're first playing chess, right? So that's why I think sales is a lot like chess, because when you're first getting into it, you're like, okay, I know I have to do some sort of discovery, so I'm going to ask some questions. They may be strategic, they may be tactical, they may make sense, they may not, but I'm going to learn, and that's okay. You should go and learn and fail a whole bunch of times, because you don't make good barbecue the first time. You make a lot of bad barbecue first, right? So go and make a bunch of mistakes. But then as you mature and you start to understand what moves that you should be making or shouldn't be making and how you should think about it, you become a little bit less anxious to make that first move. And you're going to want to stare at the board for a while. And you're going to want to think about the move that you make and the three consequences that that might happen against you, or the three things that it might open up. But
Mhm.
sales is a strategic game. It is a thinking person's sport. And if you are going to attack it like it's a transactional affair in this market, I don't think you're going to do very well. You have to think about all of the permutations that are going to result from the moves that you make.
Totally. And how do you get a team to think like that? How do you train your team? I hear this expression all the time. It's kind of like what you're talking about, like slowing down to speed up. How do you not just do the first thing that comes to your mind and think about all the different stakeholders that might be involved in the deal? How do you think about all those potential next steps and weigh them? How do you get a team to think like that?
You have to have a manager that thinks that way. That is where you hire a good leader, a good sales leader, a good frontline sales leader who thinks this way, because their role is simply to coach and mentor and get their sales reps to be better. So if you don't have a sales manager who thinks in this way and thinks very tactically and very quickly, then I think that you actually have a bigger problem. This is where the experience in the industry comes from. And we talked about that during the preamble to the podcast, which the scary thing is that, and here's the stat, 85% of first-time sales leaders have no formal training. None, zero. My son, before he was allowed to babysit when he was 13, had to take a 2-week course, right? But in corporate land, you can just go and be a frontline sales leader and have a big impact on people's lives without any training. So I think right now the biggest thing that in the industry is what it needs is it needs a massive investment in frontline salespeople and frontline sales leaders, excuse me, so that they can think to be strategic and take their time and look at it as a chessboard. Because if you're not going to do it, your competition certainly is going to.
Totally. And I think that this is we were talking about before. This is the hardest role in I think just B2B companies, period, as being a
Agreed.
CEO now and seeing all the different roles, I think being that frontline sales leader to set the tone, to set the bar for those sellers, it's very challenging. What would you stack rank as the most important, either three qualities or three things for them to instill in their team? If you were to, think about the best frontline leaders that you've had and how you coach your team, if they couldn't do anything else, what would those few things be that they are really good at?
Well, I look for four things when I hire, and it's coachability, urgency, resiliency, and credibility. And their way to just mix those four attributes in as a sales leader, especially, oh, sorry, and one more, and it's curiosity. I find if you have a mix of those traits within you, that you have a higher average of being a successful sales leader, so that you can instill those traits into your sellers, especially curiosity. And I'll tell you why about curiosity is that
How do you
in
instill that in someone? This is something that I struggle with, right? Like to me, so many of those traits feel innate. Those feel
mm,
like deep-seated personality traits that you've developed, you've partly been born with, and you've partly developed over the X number of years. And then how do you, in a matter of weeks or months, just professionally hone in on such important interpersonal, deep-seated traits and values in a way?
yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, you hire looking for those traits, right? So, but specifically about curiosity is I like to say that the sales cycle is like a watch, right? And I challenge the sellers to understand the sales cycle. Like, I want to know if this cog moves this wheel, which moves this gear, which then turns the hands. I want to know how that works in the organization, so that therefore you can make the best decision on the chessboard, right? If their CRM, if they're looking to buy a CRM, I want to understand how they're using it today and what are the pitfalls of using it today and what are the good things about what it's generating for the business today. And if they could change any of those things, what would they be? And if they could change those things, what would the impact be? And would the impact be great enough for them to actually do it? Like, it's all about how all of the things work in an organization so that you understand, is this person going to buy, right? Is this deal going to happen? A, and B, is it going to have the material impact enough for them to make them sign the piece of paper? And then when you take a step back, that's where you have to understand, like, the curiosity, the in-depth understanding of the account to truly say, yeah, it is gonna close, and I'll tell you why. It's because if we have this thing, it's going to increase the sales by 15% in this region. And if it does, then it's going to translate to the other region, as an example, right? But if you don't have that innate desire to understand how everything works, look, it's probably not the industry for you. Even in the buying process, like, you could be selling to somebody, but my favorite question in sales, by the way, is what happens next, right? Well, then this person has to get involved. Okay, and what happens after that? Well, then it goes through a threshold signing. Oh, and what's the threshold? It's under 100 grand. Well, this is over 100 grand. So what happens next? It's understanding the rules of the game so you can play better. And the training of it happens when you do your deal reviews, whether it's Medic or MedPick or whatever one you want to use, but constantly asking that question in sales, what happens next, will train those reps to be more curious.
Totally. Yeah, through that inspection. Well, maybe to play off of your analogy, it sounds like through the process and through that curiosity, you're understanding what moves on the chessboard to make based on even uncovering where their pieces are. Without those questions, you're kind of making your moves without even seeing the other side. That's kind of what I'm picturing in my mind. And you're training them to, okay, yes, you're playing your game, but that's half the game. Because if you can't even understand what's on the other side of the board, you're just moving things haphazard, hoping that, it clicks.
Well, sure. I mean, like, a perfect example is, hey, we just got sent the InfoSec documents. Oh, great. So what happens after that? Right? And there's an assumption that, oh, well, then I guess it just goes into legal. Well, does it? That's like, no assumptions, right? We want to be based on fact because we're a time-bound organization. If we make one bad assumption, that could be the difference of the deal in this quarter or next quarter. Or, hey, I think I can commit it now because we just got InfoSec documents. Well, so before we fill them out, should we say something like, hey, I'm happy to fill out the InfoSec documents, but there is a lot of organizations asking for those now. I can prioritize them if we're the vendor of choice. Are we the vendor of choice now? Right? Oh, and then they run off and they scurry and they go do that step, right? It's all about protecting, like, the next step and making sure that you know what happened so that your commit can be credible.
Totally. Well, before we move off the topic of the importance of the frontline manager, any other things that you found to be incredibly important in terms of either hiring them, training, or the things that they can impart on the sellers themselves?
Yeah, I think that the if you take curiosity as one thing, but I guess the other thing is, and this is something that you'll probably glean after a few interviews, is that you want to hire somebody. Sounds fairly obvious, but there's a lot of chameleons in the interview cycle, right? Is you're trying to find the person who just has that sense of fire in them and wants to make a difference in their life and wants to do sales. I've had a lot of people say to me in job interviews, well, I've been told that I'd be really good at sales, so I thought I'd try it. And this is for obviously entry level roles or SDR roles. And I would say, like, that's not the mindset to have if you're gonna interview, especially in sales. In sales, your mindset should be, this is really, really tough, and I'm gonna go through some serious ups and downs in my career or in this role. And I'm prepared for those ups and downs because at the end of the day, I see this being a fantastic industry and I want to be the best. That should be your mindset. If you're in this for second or third place and think that you can do okay, wrong industry. I've seen too many people get spit up and chewed out because they think that, like, for lack of a better word, that it's easy. It is not easy. And it is why that people who get really, really good have such, great lives, and they're able to, get paid like doctors and lawyers. But that comes with a lot of hard work. So if you're not prepared, like, don't even try. It's like golf. If you're not going to be good at it, don't even play.
Totally. Yeah, it reminds me of it's very similar to, this analogy is made all the time with professional sports, right? The best of the best get paid a ton and they're really good at it and they love it, but to get there is really, really challenging. But you got to enjoy the journey, right? You got to enjoy the training, the going
Oh
to the
yeah,
driving range. You got to enjoy putting and doing all that kind of stuff. It's not just, not just winning deals. Yeah.
100%.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap, John, we got a few rapid fire questions. We're going to ask for one word or one sentence answers. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. First, what do you think the main reason most teams miss their ARR targets?
Oh, um,
The most common reason.
commitment, lack of commitment.
Love it. Favorite resource related to revenue leadership? Could be a book, a course, a podcast, anything that you've consumed.
The book, The 48 Laws of Human Nature. Or sorry,
That's a
it's
good
The
one.
48 Laws of Power.
Power laws. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a really good one. The number one challenge for revenue leaders in 2024.
Coaching strategically and leaving tactics at the door.
The best segment to sell into, SMB, mid-market, or enterprise?
It's funny enough. I don't sell enough into this segment because of who we are, but I think the SMB is the best.
Most important organization on the revenue team, sales, CS, or marketing?
Marketing.
And your favorite way to unplug for the demands of revenue leadership?
Take the dog for a nice long walk.
Exactly what I'm going to do after this. That's amazing. I still got to double back though on, we're maybe going to have a similar thought here, but why marketing over sales and CS?
Um, Marketing for me is, if you've ever had a really, really good partner in marketing as a sales leader, it's like, it's like Mick and Keith, it's like Robert Plant and Jimmy Page. Like, I hope your leaders know, or your listeners know who those are. But when you're in that zone and you are firing with your marketing leader, nothing is better than that, because, like, after all, it's a machine, and it's the machine that I'm closest to, right? It goes from, marketing to SDR to sales, and that nice flow is happening, and you're hitting all of your percentages, and the messaging is working, and all of the content that's flying. Like, when that rare thing happens, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you go to the golf course and you're like a shitty golfer, but then all of a sudden, like, you find this, like, Zen moment, and you have the round of your life. Picture that. And when you get it, you thoroughly enjoy it. So I've had the opportunity to have that a couple of times, and for me, it's like the holy grail. An in-tune marketing leader with an in-tune sales leader, they'll write a number one hit song any day.
Totally. I appreciate the context there. But John, this was awesome. Learned a ton from you today. I bet you the community did as well. So thanks for taking time out of the busy day and scaling your new team to share some advice with the community.
Yes, and Ross, if you don't mind, I would like to say that we also have the rally call, and the rally call is it's our own podcast, but more importantly, the rally call has just put out some courses for frontline sales leaders. So if you're interested and you're a frontline sales leader and you're trying to understand just what your role is, come to the rally call. It's TheRalllyCall.com. And this has been an absolute pleasure.